in a confirmation hearing for a MAGA firebrand who could not even make it clear if she was going to be in charge of the border and mass deportations. Those two issues, of course, day one priorities for Team Trump that should fall under DHS purview. Here's Stephen Miller on that topic back in November.
It's going to be at light speed, Sean. The moment that President Trump puts his hand on that Bible and takes the oath of office, as he has said, the occupation ends, Liberation Day begins. He will immediately sign executive orders, sealing the border shut, beginning the largest deportation operation in American history.
So this is a thing that, if it's happening, starts Monday at noon. And as we sit here today, nobody knows if it's going to be that guy, Stephen Miller, alongside border czar Tom Homan, doing that thing, leading the charge, or if it will be Kristi Noem, who sat for her confirmation hearing today. And the question arises, is the Trump administration trying to avoid congressional oversight completely for whatever it is they have planned? Here's Senator Andy Kim on that.
I guess I just want to ask you just point blank, like, who's going to be in charge of the border?
Well, the president will be in charge of the border. It's a national security issue, and the president is in charge of this country and has made a promise to the American people, and we will fulfill his agenda.
But I guess I got confused. When Trump made the announcement about Tom Homan, he said, quote, I'm pleased to announce that Tom Homan, and said that he's in charge of our nation's borders. So I guess, again, I'd just like to go back to you. How are you going to work with Mr. Homan? What is the division there? I'm trying to get a better sense of who's in charge.
Yeah, Tom Homan is an incredible human being who has over 30 years of experience.
Incredible experience.
Yeah,
I get
at
that.
the border.
I'm just trying to think through
the insight and wisdom.
Decision-making process when it comes to your work. For instance, will he be giving orders directly to CBP, ICE, USCIS?
Tom Homan has a direct line to the president. He is an advisor to the president, the border czar. I obviously will be, if nominated and confirmed, and put into the position of being the Department of Homeland Security Secretary and responsible for the authorities that we have and the actions that we take.
So I just raise that as a concern of mine, because not only is that about the function of our executive branch, but also the capabilities of this committee to be able to properly do our constitutional duties for oversight, the ability for us to be able to have that conversation.
Noem also faced questions about other critical functions of the Department of Homeland Security, including disaster relief. Here's what she said about playing politics with disaster aid.
I assume you will agree with me that withholding disaster relief by President Trump or any other chief executive of the United States is a violation of his duty and of law.
Well, Senator, leadership has consequences. And looking at the tragedy that's happening in California,
I want to ask you yes or no, with all due respect. It's an easy...
What's happening in California is the ramification of many decisions over many years. But under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, there will be no political bias to how disaster relief is delivered to the American people.
So if President Trump were to say to you, we're going to withhold money from Connecticut or Michigan or any of the states, Iowa, because we don't like the governor or we don't like the politics of the state, you would stand up to him and say, Mr. President, we need to allocate that money.
Well, Senator, in 3 days, President Trump will take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law in this country, and he will do that, and I'll be glad to have him back.
And I don't speak
to hypotheticals, which is what you're asking me to do, but what I will tell you is that as Secretary, I will do the same. I will deliver the programs as the
Well, it's
laws
more than a
dictate.
hypothetical, with all due respect, and I apologize for interrupting you, but my time is limited, as you know, as a veteran of these hearings. It's more than a hypothetical. It's based on experience with President Trump withholding money from Washington State and elsewhere. I need to know from you, will you stand up to the president?
Will you stand up to the president? And it's a question now about the person who will most likely head the Department of Homeland Security in a second Trump administration. That was Kristi Noem's confirmation hearing, and it is where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is here with me at the table for the hour. Co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Alicia Menendez, is back. Also back, president of the National Action Network, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, the Reverend Al Sharpton's here. Let me ask you, Vaughn Hilliard, about Kristi Noem. She was talked about all the time. Her name floated around all the time over the summer, into the summer, ahead of her own publicity tour for her own book, about her own account, about shooting her own puppy who was wild. It was reported that Trump didn't love that, which is fascinating because let me put up a headline about what Trump wanted to do to migrants to this country. Quote, shoot migrants' legs, build alligator moat behind Trump's ideas for border. This was a 2019 piece of reporting in the New York Times that says this. Privately, the president had often talked about fortifying a border wall with a water-filled trench stocked with snakes or alligators, prompting aides to seek a cost estimate. He wanted the wall electrified with spikes on top that could pierce human flesh. After publicly suggesting that soldiers shoot migrants if they threw rocks, the president backed off when his staff told him that was illegal. But later in a meeting, aides recalled he suggested that they shoot migrants in the legs to slow them down. That's not allowed either, they told him. This is conduct, I guess, that could again fall under the purview of the governor, Governor Noem. And this is a political figure totally unique in American political life who is ascending to the executive branch, to a cabinet post, after describing an act so brutal. I think about 100% of Americans disapproved of it. Where does she stand today in Trump's inner circle?
She is somebody who, let's be very clear, Donald Trump is tasking with a remarkable request to oversee what he says would be a mass deportation effort, the largest since Dwight D. Eisenhower. Kristi Noem from South Dakota, I mean, I was out there back in 2018 when she narrowly won her race for governor. She was the congresswoman at the time. And yet what he is asking her to do is oversee a deportation program that, frankly, we have not seen in our major urban areas since Sheriff Joe Arpaio was at the helm of the sheriff's office in the greater Phoenix area back from 2005 to 2016. I remember Reverend Sharpton was out there at some of the protests back at the time of the signing of SB 1070, and Joe Arpaio and his sheriff's office was responsible for tens of thousands of individuals in Maricopa County being deported. Yet ultimately, his workplace raids, in which his office targeted workplaces in which there were suspected undocumented immigrants working, and also what he called crime suppression sweep, which is where he'd send his sheriff's deputies into predominantly brown neighborhoods and pull people over, for example, a broken taillight, and then check their immigration records and ultimately turn them over to federal ICE authorities and have them deported. All of that came crashing down when a federal court stepped in and said that it amounted to racial profiling. And so I think what Kristi Noem is being asked by Donald Trump is something that Joe Arpaio struggled to do even in just one locality in one jurisdiction. And what is in front of her is a promise that Donald Trump has made to the American public quite prominently at the Republican National Convention. There were signs of mass deportations now, and she is the one, the South Dakota governor, who is being asked to go and ultimately work with ICE, who has limited resources relatively, in order to pull off such a feat as this. It's really quite a remarkable request that is being put in front of her.
She was asked about some of those Trump 1.0 programs and policies. Let me show you her answer on child separation, Rev.
Senator, the Trump administration never had a family separation policy. They had a zero tolerance policy, which said that our laws would be followed. What I'm alarmed by is the over 300,000 children that went missing during the Biden administration. And when we talk about children and what they're potentially facing as far as victimization in this country and the trafficking that's going on, this administration's lack of desire to find out where those children are or what they may be going through is alarming to me.
Let's put aside what happened in the past. There are still 1,000 children who are separated and waiting to be reunited. I'd like your commitment that you're going to continue the effort to reunite them with their parents.
Senator, keeping families together is critically important to me and to this country. I'm concerned about Laken Riley's family, that they no longer have her. I'm concerned about the fact that we have people in this country that don't know where their children are, or people in other countries who sent their children here and they've been lost by this administration.
I think it's clear that she is unprepared, not only for the examination, but to take the job, because much of what she was saying clearly had nothing to do with the position that she's been nominated for. Donald Trump himself has said that he's going to separate families, and the parents ought to understand that, and they can go with they'll take their children with them. I mean, this is not something that has been vague. He has said that himself. So either she's going to defend the policy, or either she's going to attack the policy, or admit she doesn't know what she's doing. And I would say that it's one of the last two. I also think that Vaughn is right to bring up Arpaio. Let's not forget when we were out there, when I was out there, Vaughn was a little guy, didn't have a beard yet. When I was out there leading protests with others with Arpaio, Arpaio became one of the biggest supporters of Donald Trump.
Yeah, the first recipient of a pardon, I think.
That's right. He was the first recipient of a pardon, and he toured around Arizona helping Donald Trump. So, and Arpaio was the symbol. He became the personification of having people's families separated, racially profiling people, because they were not pulling people over that they thought looked like they come from Canada. This was all based on race, and then he would parade them around and make them wear pink underwear once they had held them incarcerated until they deported them. That is who Donald Trump is, and that's who he says he is. And you can agree or disagree, but let's not distort what he's made clear.